Good morning, everyone. Today is March 20th, 2022. I am your host and the creator of the Sonic Ring Bond AU, Joshua Tarwater. You can find me on Twitter at Josh Tarwater. For those new to the streams, my alternate universe, or AU, is one focused primarily on Amy Rose, as she was developed to have Sonic's moveset rather than the Pico Pico Hammer, and with a very heavy emphasis on the rings and making them a regular part of the world, not just the games. You can see in the little animation here how she looks, at least from behind. Big blob eyelashes and a white leotard. You've probably seen the design all over Twitter. Haven't tried anything too new recently myself, but that's because I've been focusing on writing. As you can, we got the synopsis here on the side. Probably been sitting here long enough for everybody to have gotten a good look at it. I'm just going to take one last look at it real quick to remind myself what I wanted to do with today's scene, and then we'll get into the actual typing. I don't talk much during the first half of the stream, but for those of you who would like me to, feel free to drop questions in the comments and I'll be glad to answer. Be warned, I do go on tangents though. Otherwise, when we get to the second half of the stream after the break, you'll get a lot more chatting out of me, as I'll go over the scene paragraph by paragraph and talk about what my intentions were, and try not to get too tangenty, I suppose. But again, just allow me a second to reread my synopsis. And if you're curious about the stop and the music, it's because I play stuff I do not have the rights to play live on stream. But if you would like to know what I listen to, I usually will keep it in the comments. Well, the comments in my writing. Don't want to bog it down too much with unnecessary stuff in the chat, but I am listening to South Island, a long version of it, by Mitsuhiro Tada. And this is off of the Sonic the Hedgehog . And I'm going to go OVA so as not to confuse myself or anyone else due to the live-action Sonic movie. As for where I'm listening to it, playing it off a file I have on my computer. Though to be perfectly honest, I believe this one should have actually been a recreation by ear, which I found on SoundCloud, and that the recreator made available in a Google Drive document. Unfortunately, I don't remember the exact way I came about it, but you should be able to find it on YouTube, Dailymotion, whatever your preference is for tracking it down. I did find the actual album on, or at least a production demo version of it on Spotify. Maybe you live in the right part of the world where you can actually listen to it without it being blocked. So I'll go ahead and share that into chat for those so fortunate. Unfortunately, I am not able to, so I, as I said, will listen to it based off a file of a recreation. Well, let's go ahead and get into today's scene. And we'll start with that same line as from Sorry if I'm a little slow today. Been kind of out of it on a mental health level. Hopefully that will not get in the way of today's stream. And so I'll do my best to stay focused. And another thing you'll see me do a bit during this, and you'll see me label it as GDN, is I do perceive my writing as also files having it made into a game, and so these GDNs are just game design notes. I'm no programmer myself or actual game designer, but who knows, if I ever actually get a Discord going for this, which is a big plan for the AU this year, I'm just very unfocused recently, but if things work out, we'll find it on there, and who knows, maybe somebody will like everything and put it together themselves, which would be awesome. But let's just say for now, the idea of writing it out as a game design is also a structural thing to help me keep a flow and idea of what I'm doing. There's a word I don't use often. Let me make sure it's what I want it to be. Now, in the past scenes like this, if you've been following me writing for well before I started on this version of the story, I would always be striving to push anywhere for 6 to 8 pages of this format. But this time around, and one of the ways that I would do that, and why this time around I will be doing it differently, is I would purposefully push to split most of my scenes into a part A and a part B. But this time around, I'm less so worried about that and just want to focus on one topic per scene. And while the part A, part B was nice, and it kind of would require you to not just be able to consume the story through the synopses for each episode, but it gave you a nice little twist and a shift of focus into scenes. But again, this time around, I want to keep a bit more focused, so shorter scenes will be the norm. But it doesn't mean that I want to reduce the quality, it's just a matter of focus for myself. And I just realized I've been typing and typing and never did this. Look at that, it's the story. So, but again, what I was talking about earlier, you'll see me leaving comments on the side. My apologies for the stream being really low quality today. As I said a bit earlier, been a load out of it recently. Mental health could be better. Fortunately for me, working on these streams helps a little bit with that. So I'm definitely going to recommend that, unlike in past streams, you go ahead and jump along to the midway point if you're watching this later on, and just get to the proving part. For everyone kind enough to join me now, thank you so much, and my apologies for being such a mess today. Also, I don't normally go back and correct that much. As I said, I'm a little out of it today, so sorry this has affected the quality of the stream. Good morning, the Tiger Writes. Welcome to today's stream. Mind me being a little off today. My thoughts are kind of scattered, so writing's a little tricky today. Thank you. Appreciate the support. Glad to hear that. Welcome to the stream, Untamed Momo. Hope you enjoy my bit of Sonic the Hedgehog fanfiction writing. Feel free to ask any questions if you have them. I'm always glad to answer, even if I'm a little distracted today. Alright, thank you very much, the Tiger Rights. Just about done with the scene, so you almost saw all of it. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope you have a great day. And there we go. That wraps up the writing segment of this stream. Ended up being a longer scene than I thought it would be. I just need to drop in one more note. And I'll go back and correct the scene numbers later. And we'll give a little preview for what will come on tomorrow's stream. But with that, it's time that I go ahead and take a short break. Usually anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. So if you need to stretch and get yourself something to eat or got tasks to take care of, now's a great time for it. And I, meanwhile, will go ahead and take my break. Thank you so much for joining me so far, and we'll be back in a bit. Good morning, everyone, and I am back. To those of you just joining me, I'm Josh Tarwat, and welcome to the Sonic Ringbond AU writing stream. I'm both the host of the stream and the creator and writer for the Sonic Ringbond AU. As we're coming back from break and going into the second half of the stream, I'll be taking the time to proofread and go over the stream paragraph by paragraph and talk about a bit about what I was thinking of, as well as what my intentions were. There's a bit of fluff. I would not feel bad if someone told me, or I wouldn't try to correct them at least, if someone told me that this particular scene feels a bit padded. But we'll talk about that padding and explain what purpose it's serving and why it's there. If you'd like to listen along to the music I'm listening to, I cannot direct you really to Spotify, though I got a link up there. You may be one of the people who can listen to that particular link. But otherwise, you'll have to find other ways to listen to the music I'm listening to today, which is going to be South Island, long version. And, well, it's the theme of South Island, would be the more accurate way to phrase it. Let me go ahead and actually get into my notes and fix that. And it is by Mitsuhiro Tada, song from the Sonic OVA. Version I'm listening to should be a recreation I found online, but we won't get too tied up in all of that stuff. For those curious about my notes, the reasoning behind them is actually going to do with the idea of both to make sure I'm in the right mood when I'm working, because I do go back and proof and make changes. A big change recently, if you've joined me for prior streams, I actually had 2 scenes worth of content, which I have now completely changed up. The idea was that there was so much lore that I was actually advised it was spoiling things I can do with the story. And so I went ahead and cut out a lot of that lore, and it will be introduced in time later on as the story progresses. I have no timetable for it though, because I am an author who writes literally, I like to say by the seat of my pants, but I make it up as I go along. And so, as I only write during these streams on my days off, I do have a tendency of thinking about all sorts of ways the story can go during the week, particularly while I'm at work. And I listen to music regularly, and different songs inspire and influence me. And I make a little list of all the stuff I could listen to and could not listen to. And so when I finally sit down and actually write, I'll usually settle on whatever song was last in my mind and really, I feel, captures the vibe that I'm looking for the scene. The theme of South Island is kind of an iconic Sonic the Hedgehog theme. And as this particular set of events and what I refer to as the Park Islands, which is a name you'll only really see in the notes, Sonic mentions it in this particular scene, and we'll see when we get there. But I also, of course, am structuring this so that way it would function as a video game. What I have in mind is kind of, not that I'll ever make it, but the idea I have is kind of a mixture of 2D action stages and an isometric overworld for where you would do quests and do a lot of the basic stuff, kind of based off of how I believe Sonic Chronicles controls for exploring the maps. I can't say because my only experience with that was actually way back when Sonic Chronicles was first announced, you could actually access. I don't know if the website's even still around. I'll actually have to check. But on the website, you could actually drag Sonic around using a mouse around Green Hill Zone and somewhere in the Twilight Cage. Not sure where. And that's kind of how I imagine the gameplay for the overworld or town or that type, the hub section, so to say, versus the action sections. But that's not really necessary for going into details on gameplay ideas, so much as game structure, as it does influence how I write the story. And a lot of the story writing will more so be, as you'll see again at the notes, it'll say, well, it doesn't say it here, because this is actually setting up the tutorial level. It'll actually say it in a further along note, start cutscene number, which I'll take care of off stream, getting my numbers in this sort right. I got a lot of proofing to do because rewriting 2 scenes into a single scene took up most of my week, at least the free time at the week. And why it did inform this scene, missing the rewrite will not affect being able to comprehend what's going on at this scene. And so, what I want to do with this scene is Sonic is kind of being a little uncharacteristic right now because he's a little confused by the situation. And that is that he's looking back. And it's mostly he's just trying to figure out how he got to where he is and what's the circumstances behind it. And so over the course of this scene, a lot of the idea in this scene is to explore the idea, not in depth, but in more of an external viewing of what you will see Sonic doing when he needs to move on from the past. And so with this opening line, if desire is a dream of the future and memory is a dream of the past, then what is a memory of a future once past? The idea is to kind of imply it's intangible. But for Sonic, it's a fork in the road. He can choose to go somewhere new now, and that's what this second paragraph is kind of covering, as I use it as an introduction to the scene today. And so we'll get the idea of what exactly is going on. So as we progress, a lot of these as I get more and more into the storytelling, a lot of these introduction scenes will be less abstract and philosophical unless a scene really needs it. And it'll be more so just a setting to introduce the ideas of the scene. And again, you'll see that here as I kind of transition that way and talk about Sonic being fraught with worry and he's choosing to run. Now, one of the reasons I tie that in is as much as Sonic 06 gets a tremendous a lot of flack, Sonic does preach a lot of his philosophy on dealing with being troubled when one can't think about all this stuff. And he says it pretty much, and you'll see it here. If he has time to worry, then run. And so, as we move into the scene proper, so allow me a moment to read this paragraph so I can check for any errors on my part. And you'll get that a lot during these moments. You'll get pauses from me as I just read my own work to make sure I'm getting all my proofing in. It also gives me a chance to pick up on things such as talking about Sonic being thrown across time and space before, after all his journeys. And a lot of people may go, well, that's kind of a crazy line to put into the opening chapters of a story. And it kind of is. And it kind of relies on the fact that I'm hoping my audience is aware that Sonic as a franchise has been around for over 30 years. He's been on a lot of adventures. And it's also a way to encourage people to look up Sonic and see just all the adventures that he's been on. But I'm also creating the philosophy that he's moving to his next adventure and all of this is now the past. And he's got a goal. That's what a lot of what this paragraph does, is it shifts away from everything that is and goes, if you're reading this story now, whatever his attention is here, whoever it is that needs his help, even he doesn't know where to start, but nothing from outside is going to be where your focus is as you follow this story, even if all of that outside knowledge can help you understand certain things Sonic thinks about. Now, setting-wise, as we get into Playground Jungle Zone Act 2, or episode of New History 3, and you'll see I do that a lot, that I name my chapters two ways. I tell you what episode you're in, and then I tell you what act you're in whatever zone. We're going to be getting our first big change tomorrow, as we'll no longer be in Playground Jungle tomorrow. 2-act zone, no boss. One field area, which doesn't really have a lot, and then one tutorial level for the action stages. So really short, really quick, but the episode of New History does not change. And that's one of the things that this episode will also be covering a bit, is the idea that, sorry, mind me, Sonic is accepting that he's got to move forward. It's time to put this past behind him, even if he doesn't like the way that the situation is, and he's trying to understand why this reset happened. Is it something he needs to act on? Is it something he doesn't? Regardless, learning why this happened will give him an adventure, but he doesn't necessarily need the past to do so. And so as we get past that and we go into my typical quick lines of description, it's kind of short, not a lot to describe here, not really necessary. Mostly I'm just describing, as I will typically do with these, the setting. And first I describe Tails' workshop, which is where Sonic's going, and then I pan out to show what Sonic will be going across. Again, it's not really a lot to cover, and the idea is just to give an idea of this is where we're going, but we don't start there yet. And so it allows me to move on into talking a bit about Sonic and his running. And Sonic and his running may be hard to understand. A lot of people are just going to be used to Sonic running fast. That's what he does. And you don't really see in the games, or even the comics really, a lot of how Sonic moves. And to me, that's kind of intriguing that we don't see how Sonic moves. For me, it's a big deal because I've been with the franchise since 1991. Long time at this point, I know. But the idea to me about Sonic and his movement comes from the next game that I played. For a lot of Sonic fans, it was either the Master System or Game Gear versions of Sonic 1, but significantly more likely, like the majority of Sonic fans who are that old, or as old as I am or older, the next game was Sonic 2. It is to this day the Sonic game, and where my setting is set after the events of the most successful Sonic game ever sold. No Sonic game has moved more copies than it. And it's kind of a good place to start because a lot of people know the Death Egg Saga. But for me, my AU, as I said at the beginning of the stream, and for those who missed it, it's based on the ideas of what if Amy had gotten Sonic's moveset back during that time period instead of getting the Pico Pico hammer. And it's also about taking the rings and making them a significant, more important part of the world. And you'll see the rings come up a lot in the conversation Sonic and Tails have later in this scene. But there is another thing which swirls around, another question I ask a lot, and it creates a different direction for me to think about things. And that's the question of, what if Sonic CD had been more successful than Sonic 2? Now, that's kind of a hard thing to pull off. Not only is it the black sheep of the classic games, it was also, until the Windows version in 1995, and then eventually the Christian Whitehead and Simon Tomley, or more commonly known as Taxman and Stealth, released back in, what was that, 2012 now? It's been a while now. I may be thinking too far back, though. But for a lot of people, they never experienced the game. The Sega CD attachment, or the Mega CD, if you live in those regions of the world, globally moved only 1 million units. Sonic 2 sold over 2 million units on the Genesis alone in that time frame. And so the chances of playing Sonic CD way small. And so the idea of it potentially having been more successful than Sonic 2 is unheard of. And as a result, Sonic 2 shaped pretty much the entirety of the, we'll call it classic era, or pre-adventure. Now, the pre-adventure era came in 3 forms. The games in Japanese media, including the OVA. It included the Archie comics, which was again, though, influenced by Sonic 2. And, of course, the DIC cartoon. But even the other DIC cartoon, Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, took its inspiration from Sonic 2, and you have the presence of Sonic and Tails. And then, of course, you also have the Fleetway comics. Again, Tails is present pretty much from the get-go. Even over in Japan, where Sonic is not popular, the Shogakukan manga, of which Amy was originally test run the concepts for her character, and I would say, based on how her character isn't there, it's pre-Madonna influence, and pre a bit of what would become her tomboyish nature. Even there, Tails eventually shows up. He's just that much of a part of the franchise. And as a result, it's kind of funny then that in my story, while Amy has appeared already in a fashion, it's Tails who's more of a significant part of the story first. Even if eventually I'll get to the point of where she will be the character I follow most. Not 100% true, because it will be her, Sonic, and also a original character of mine, specifically made for this story, who will be introduced later. It's actually going to be a bit before Amy herself is more so the lead of the story. And so, as I said, just a lot to think about. But going backwards from my tangent and talking about how Sonic moves, Sonic 2 defined the games for a lot of people. And that's going to include anything from the beta sprites, where you can see Sonic's legs during the Wheel of Feet motion, and a lot of that stuff, the really thick animation and drawings of the legs and so forth. But I didn't experience Sonic 2 Next. In fact, I only played Sonic 2 on the Genesis once, and that was a rare trip to a friend's house, and played the two-player mode for at least one level with them, and that would be the competition mode, not the main mode. And I don't really remember what my opinion was on it at the time, but the number one thing I remember from it was just thinking about how inferior his setup was compared to my dad's. My dad had a big screen TV for the time, Dolby Surround even back then, and the picture was so clear for the standards then. And I just remember I didn't really get into it. The screen was so small, I couldn't really see it well. I was spoiled. I'll be honest about that. I was spoiled on my dad's video game setup. But that now brings me again back to Sonic CD. That was the game I played next. That was the first Sonic game I beat. That is, to this day, still my favorite video game of all time. And when you boot up that game, and you sit on the title screen for about, 15-20 seconds, it cuts away from the title screen, and it plays an FMV. I didn't think about the quality back then. Anime cutscenes on the Sega CD were mind-boggling back then. Absolutely shaped my life. And in that FMV sequence, you see how Sonic moves. And so, that's where we get into this opening paragraph past the descriptors. Is we talk about Sonic's number one thing that he enjoys. And I started off with a contrast. It's though he enjoys it, he always wears a look of concentration. You don't see this triumph and satisfaction until he's conquered a self-made challenge. And so, with this story, he's trying to clear his head. And so he's purposely coming up with several. Now, there's the gameplay idea, there's a tutorial level I'm describing him running through. But there's also Sonic's philosophy of running instead of worrying. And as I move on from that, I talk about why he concentrates so hard and why he's running. And I talk about the fact that he scrambles. If you play the Sonic CD opening frame by frame, there are very few instances in it where he's just running in a straight line as a traditional run. He's jumping off trees, skipping over rocks, forcing himself to stay on the surface of the water, running along the sides of walls. He rarely gets a chance to just run flat out. And if you consider that Sonic is a thrill seeker, a daredevil, these are ways he was advertised in the 90s, and it was present in the way he moved. He's always challenging himself, and even the Amy's creator, lead of the overall community that led to how her final character is, Kazuyuki Hoshino-song, or let me say that in the right order if I'm going to use the song on Arabic, Hoshino Kazuyuki song, he describes Sonic as both never looking back and always heading towards his next adventure or challenge. And so the idea of just being able to run flat out, yes, it will get him the highest level of speed, and Sonic loves speed. However, it results in the least amount of challenge. And so it's what he loves, but it's simultaneously not to the highest level to which he can enjoy it. And so that's where we move into this next paragraph as I get more into the idea of how Sonic moves. And not just the philosophy that goes behind it. And you'll see I even take that into second line. He rarely went all out, however, as it would take him from the scenery he challenged. And that's the idea of he could, but he won't be able to enjoy what he's doing. And I start just a basic description of all the ways that Sonic can move. And it's just a fun bit of writing talking about his overall movement. And as I get to the end of the paragraph, I make the time to transition to the idea that rings can protect you from harm. It's a very basic description of rings, but having changed those two scenes I was talking about into one far more dense and concentrated scene with a lot less lore, it was necessary I take the time to reintroduce the idea of rings protecting you. And that's where this next paragraph jumps in. And again, I also mentioned the fact that rings make up the world. It's a constant that I'm constantly feeding into the story. It's back in the first scene. It is in the new second scene. I don't think I mentioned it too much in the third scene, but it is here in this fourth scene. And it's going to be something I'm going to have to get more inventive with to keep reminding people of how rings work in my AU. And how they really are an established part of Sonic's world. And so let me just go ahead and read through the paragraph, make sure I'm not missing anything. And as I end and switch out of the tutorial section, and even talk about the next cutscene, I should actually come over here to my note. And do this. And there we go, that takes care of that. One day I'll get to it. I've made this project far too big for myself instead of just telling the story. And so, of course, even though back up at the top I give my quick descriptions to set the scene, as I go into the discussion now, it's important to shift away from the external jungle and start detailing the shack's interior and how they're interacting with the workshop. And now an important bit at the end of this paragraph, and I talk about it a lot. Tails is a character who I've had a love him, hate him relationship. And where this stems from with Tails is a matter of his role in the series. Now, if you're familiar with some of the lore behind, well, some of the development history behind Sonic Boom, you'll know there's an archaeologist in there that pretty much Amy works with by the name of, I think his name's Cliff, I don't recall. though you'll be specifically referring to Rise of Lyric because he's not in the TV show or even the comics. We won't go into the problems with Boom, but the original idea behind the character was for him to be an inventor. And Sega specifically stepped in and said that only Tails and Eggman can be inventors. And that's an interesting detail, that only they can be inventors. And it makes sense to a degree, because Eggman's primary thing is he creates new robots to challenge Sonic, taking pride in his latest and greatest creations. However, Tails, when he's introduced, is introduced as a tinkerer. He works with other people's stuff to get new creations. And so the idea of him being an inventor and creating from scrap, it starts to make him look overpowered. At his absolute worst, if you're familiar with the idea of Sonic being a one brain cell teenager, a lot of that stems from the idea that he's not smart enough to do anything on his own without listening to Tails, which heavily goes against Sonic's character and how he's presented. But where it comes from is that for Tails to be useful, he has to start inventing, and he has to start being the thinker. He's also constantly used as the source of exposition in the story. And so that's why in this scene, while he is exposing to a bit, I also try to shape the scene so that way him and Sonic are bouncing off each other, interacting, and showing Sonic's smarts and Tails' smarts. Sonic is far from dumb, and I want to make sure I keep Sonic's intelligence intact without undermining Tails. And so the idea that Eggman can make a computer small enough to fit inside of a ladybug-sized robot, which isn't much bigger than a meter tall. And it completely runs all the systems to a degree of it being a simple AI with a discernible personality. Yet Tails, working with the same technology, while he's able to build a computer, he ends up taking up his entire workshop. And so you have this mess of wires and junk, and it's just a big cluttered mess, but it works. That's the difference between somebody who tinkers and someone who invents. The inventor thinks about the final design. The tinkerer thinks about what they can get it to do, what they can get the components to do. And so I'm keeping Tails as smart as I can, but I want to keep his focus on interacting with other people's work instead of creating his own. The Miles Electric is a cool device, but conversely, it's absurd to take Tails from slapping a rocket onto a biplane to being able to make communication devices that puts Eggman's own tech to shame. And so I want to avoid leaning into Tails being an inventor so much as he is a tinkerer, as I think it makes his character more believable, and it shows him as learning by interacting with other people's work, but also not fully understanding how it works. You know, kids take stuff apart, but they never manage to usually put it back together how it came apart. And that's what creates a lot of the kookiness around Tails. And I think that adds a bit of character to him. Let me just make sure with the diodes here that it was the word I was looking for. It's looking like it is. And pretty much kind of is. Give me a second to... See if I can't find what I really want. Probably gonna have to take just a quick moment to do some light research. Yeah, allow me just a second to go do some light research. Oh, yeah, looks like I'm not really gonna find what I'm looking for. I'm gonna have to. There we go. Now I think I found what I was looking for. There we go. Much, much happier now. Now I'm done confusing myself, let's go ahead and correct this. Much better. That's what I was looking for. So back at it. So again, I was talking about Tails' intelligence versus Sonic's, and Sonic is more wise than he is book smart. Street smart versus book smart would be the way that people define it. Though in Sonic's case, it's also a form of wisdom. He's very, very aware and has a very quick understanding of what he interacts with. and hence the idea of referring to the scientific side of mumbo jumbo. And now, a lot of what I'm going to go into with this scene is defining a lot of how I see the Chaos Emeralds very differently from most people do. That's due to a translation of the Sonic 1, or the original Sonic the Hedgehog from 1991 instruction manual, where it pretty much describes the Chaos Emeralds as crystallized manifestation of all the life on the planet. And, kind of like how I talk, my story as Tails explains how Sonic's walking proof of that, go on a bit of a tangent here. And I specifically use a bulky computer monitor because most of Eggman's mechs don't have computer screens that you can use for it. And so we're talking that Tails likely would have built something from a TV or something, so think old CRTs. And so now one of the things that I do here as we transition is Sonic takes it funny at first hearing Tails praise Eggman, but again, I do root my take on Sonic into the OVA, so he's not necessarily always nice and comforting. And so, Tails defending Eggman, considering the harm Eggman does, it's enough to get Sonic irritated. And I try to keep things on pace using Sonic's impatience for that. And it also is an opportunity for me to introduce again the idea of Sonic's danger sense. I mentioned it in the prior scene, kind of bringing it back again here, that something is bugging Sonic, something's wrong and he can sense it. But also the idea that Sonic's memories were a dream. Because that's what he's pretty much asking about ultimately, is what happened to the Chaos Emeralds? Why is it that all his memories don't really matter anymore because they're now a future he's not living? And so, as I said, it's a bit tangenty how this scene jumps back and forth. And I would greet Trip 6. Except they seem to be a bot dropping in an ad. So, kind of unfortunate that way, but if a bot wants to drop by, let the bot drop by. It's not like anybody's going to pay it much attention. And even Sonic's quick jump into topic to topic. And so I generate the confusion and make sure I keep that in Tails. But then we get things moving along again using Sonic's impatience, and the fact that Tails is relatively early in his relationship with Sonic, and so it's easy for him to still get nervous and uncomfortable around them. And so I want to keep that as part of his character, because proving himself to Sonic is something that he wants to do until he realizes he needs to prove himself to himself. And that's part of Tails' growth as a character. And even though he's meant to be static and always trying to prove himself to Sonic, there are very noticeable changes in his character once he proves himself to himself. Unfortunately, from Sonic Colors onward, He reads as a character who proved himself to himself in his technological ability, but his ability to be a hero, to adventure alongside Sonic, to be a hero like Sonic, that's gone. The fact that he's so comfortable around Sonic that he's no longer even trying to prove himself to Sonic, it's what reduces Tails to a very exposition-heavy character. And one of the things I think that makes him an appealing character to people with Sonic Boom is the need to prove himself. A core part of his character, due to his lack of confidence, is actually back and put on display. And it's an interesting contrast with his character. That's something I want to try to hold on to. And so letting Sonic being patient instead of so comfortable around Tails that he just lets Tails do whatever he wants, I want to keep that impatience on display and have Tails not comfortable enough to ignore it. And so now I go into the idea that Sonic's not quite in the state that he should be. Normally, if he uses the Chaos Emeralds, once they're gone, he's exhausted, doesn't have any energy, and the energy the Chaos Emeralds provided is used up. But now we got a mystery. The energy's still lingering around him, even though the Chaos Emeralds themselves are gone. And so, as we get to Sonic making kind of a moment to let Sonic get a bit more serious, take a moment to let him laugh, but then get more serious, showing that even though he can crack wise and keep levity into situation, which is one of the reasons characters like Sonic do crack wise, it's to disrupt the thought patterns of your opponent so that way they're acting out instead of rationally and thinking through, but it's also to bring relief to the people around you. But Tails remains nervous in this situation, and that cues Sonic in that there's more. Not that Sonic wouldn't suspect that there's more. And so that's what we have going on here with me describing what's going on with the computer screen. The idea is to show a bit of Sonic's intelligence. Tails is showing him what he's already suspecting. And then Tails gets a chance to go into his own explanations. And now I get into, as I was talking about at the start of this, the idea of Sonic now moving on from this future past. And Tails' dialogue, it's presented in a way to where he's trying to not call it a dream and be disrespectful. And now I bring in the fact that time travel is a part of Sonic's world and mention Little Planet. The setting is Sonic CD. And I start presenting ideas for Sonic and Tails to consider and weigh on for why the situation is what it is. A bit of a spoiler here, but let's call it misdirection. But it's misdirection based off what the characters know. So the audience will know more of the future, and of course, myself as the writer knows more. And the audience should already suspect more anyways, just because of what the prior scene is, which unfortunately there's no stream of me writing or talking about it, because it was completely reworking other stuff. And so we end up with this situation to where again I present Sonic's intelligence, but it lacks any of the science. He's just jumping straight to what it is, instead of why it's what it is. And again, I also have Tails trying not to agitate Sonic, trying to appease him, and so on. And including Tails throwing out possible hypotheses for And now as we get to this point in the idea of the siphoning, I kind of break it off. I'll jump back to it in a bit. But again, I'm trying to also keep the scenes moving so as not to linger too long. Scenes with Sonic are usually meant to be action-based, and again, Sonic prefers to run rather than spend a lot of time thinking about it if he doesn't have to. And so, Sonic accepts that they can linger. And so as we continue with the conversation, the idea that Sonic likes to be surprised and experience new things, it makes the idea of seeing the future distasteful to him. But he's also again mentioning Amy, which allows Tails to put on. So I'm showing he's got worry and he's moving to run. But I'm also now putting Sonic back on the regular path of going from Sonic 2 to Sonic 3, even though he's lacking the Chaos Emeralds. And now I take a moment to talk a bit about Eggman. People are always asking, why doesn't Sonic kill Eggman? It's a question I've seen a lot, and I even one time had a really long argument with somebody who wanted to describe Sonic as sociopathic and psychopathic for not just outright killing Eggman at any given time. And if you followed the classic games, it's not that he didn't. The original game, at the very end when you beat the last boss, there is a moment of time before the game takes control away from you, when Eggman is fleeing in his last available Eggmobile, where you can attack him and send him plummeting down a hole and the Eggmobile is exploding. If you don't attack him, he just flies off screen. If you do, he goes down this hole. And this does imply that Sonic possesses a willingness to kill him. Sonic 2, he does not try to take Eggman with him out of the Death Egg when it explodes in space. Sonic 3 and Knuckles, he destroys the last mech Eggman is using to try to have the Master Emerald while in space. These are all instances of Sonic leaving Eggman to die and literally taking actions that would outright kill him. Yet Eggman persists. And so Tails is like, you don't really think he survived. I let Sonic finish the question because, again, that impatience of his, that speed of his. And what we end up with here, Sonic is now not only starting to blow off the idea of these past adventures and being able to move forward with Atlantic, whether I lived it or dreamed it, which is, again, I'm starting to show that break. He's accepting what he doesn't know what's put him into the situation yet, that history is gone. Unless Amy's right about the future being knowable. And so as I move on from that, though, and to focus on Eggman, I bring to mention Eggman can use rings. If you recall from the prior scenes where I've been watching, I talk about, and it's even mentioned here a little bit, but one of the things rings do is they will whisk you away to safety when you should suffer inevitable harm or doom. And so, Sonic, knowing Eggman can use the rings. Now, he never attacked Eggman directly, only his mechs, and this means Eggman is more likely than not safe. And if you're curious, when does Eggman use rings? You just gotta go play Sonic Adventure 2. And the gameplay will show you Eggman makes use of rings just like everybody else does. And if Eggman is making use of rings, then that means everyone is making use of rings. Well, not so much everyone, but that means that the ideas of my AU can be applied to Eggman, and it starts to explain how he always gets away from what should be life or death situations. And so, it's not that Sonic hasn't necessarily tried to off him if put in those situations or left him to die, but simply that the situation, Eggman would be saved by the rings. I mean, consider, in Sonic 2, he beats a boss, and the boss explodes as Eggman sinks into the lava. Same with Oil Ocean. The boss explodes as Eggman sinks beneath the oil. And you see this a lot, that Sonic destroys Eggman's mechs, and Eggman doesn't fly away. He's left in what should be a untimely death form, yet he's there at the very next level causing trouble. The fact that in Sonic Adventure 2 we see Eggman interact with the rings. But it's not just Sonic Adventure 2. If you're familiar with Knuckles Chaotix, or as the Japanese title simply is, Chaotix, the entire idea of what Eggman is doing in that game is he is literally studying the rings, how they interact with the world, how they work as a power source, and how they interact with the Chaos Emeralds and Master Emeralds. And the only way he can do this is to be aware of the rings. But you can find other places too. Sonic R. Every character gets faster. Well, if they have rings, they can do certain things because they have rings. Sonic Drift, he can fire missiles as long as he has rings. And so you will see Eggman interacting with rings throughout the games on a regular enough basis. And pretty much that's kind of the thing that you can think about when you look at the games, is if a character is playable, they can use the rings. And in that regard, we now know that Eggman can use the rings, and Tails is now introduced to this concept. And it's a concept Sonic would not have known at this point in history originally, unless he had had other encounters with Eggman during those adventures before Sonic 1, which are chronicled nowhere. And no, the Sonic the Hedgehog movie does not count, because it has a completely different backstory and history for how Sonic is fighting Eggman in Green Hill Zone, and then leading into the events of the Death Egg Saga. which Sonic Movie 2 from the trailers is very much doing differently. And it's very easy for a longtime fan with me to really break off the movies from the games now. It would probably be beneficial for discussion if more game fans did such. And also, even though Iizuka Takashi's song was promised to unify the brand when he took over as the head of Sonic Team way back in 2010, 2011, things didn't work out the way he planned since that didn't happen, and you have several branches of Sonic. You now have Classic, you have Modern, you have Archie still as a known history, Fleetway still as a known history, the various Japanese manga, you have IDW, you have Boom. Prime is claiming to be set in the modern game universe, but it's going to be its own thing, because IDW made the same claim. It's its own thing. And then you have the movies, which are more like the Archie and Fleetway comics, more distinctly its own thing, despite its roots from the source material. And so, it's tough to think about. But for my story, at least, one can take comfort in the idea that we start with the games, particularly the Japanese canon, or at least translations of the Japanese canon, and what else I do know of it, and that my story picks up after Sonic 2, literally as Sonic runs out of the Death Egg from the good ending, and then things change from there. But, back on Eggman and surviving that, a little bit of a problem that I have with myself here is one of the things that I frequently argue against is that despite being the series' antagonist, the main villain, Sonic's life nemesis, Sonic is not a superhero who lives to stop Eggman. A lot of people have the perception that he is. And so this line of Sonic saying, and that means he'll be causing trouble, it's implying that I am indeed writing Sonic as the career superhero off to stop the villain. However, that was not the intention. The intention with this line is in context of everything else. He still knows that there's trouble coming. And we're going to get to that. He knows for a fact Eggman is one person that he's ever encountered who has taken the power of the Chaos Emeralds from him. That has happened. That is a fact if you're aware of Sonic Unleashed. And the way I write Sonic is his memories span all the games. And as such, Unleashed is kind of usually my stopping point, though, because Sonic Generations is when you start seeing an absence of Sonic's usually infallible memory. And it's also another point where he's encountering time being jumbled and messed up, and it's not making sense. His memories are a mess in time. And so I can technically cut everything after Unleashed off because of Sonic Generations. And that's one of the reasons I actually like to talk about stuff during my streams, is it actually clarifies my thoughts and gives me a bit of focus on stuff like that. Which I think is always a cool thing to do, is it helps me define things better. And so the idea that everything's jumbled, messy, and lost in time at that point works for me. But explaining why this line works, we'll just get a little bit deeper in, instead of the superhero idea. And so I now, though, take the time to have Tails kind of avoid mentioning that things are a little weird still. But he's saying, he's agreeing that it could be Eggman, and he's good with learning that. And sorry, I got a little distracted there because I totally missed the line I was looking for, which isn't the paragraph I was talking about. Because Tails shifts to now point out that there could be more variables and not just Eggman. And that's with this line right here. And you'll see Tails introduce the idea that the rings could be involved with why things changed. And if you recall the first stream, and I introduced the primary villain of my AU, he's not the primary villain of the IP. That will always be Eggman, and as such, Eggman will have that influence in my AU. But for the AU specifically, I do have the God of Rings, my OC, Emperor Benedict Yodoku, as a villain. And so this is an opportunity for me to tie in the idea that he could be behind what happened. Even though he admitted that he's relatively powerless because of the seal on him. And so I'm creating questions and plot threads which can or cannot be followed, but the idea is to get people thinking and questioning what they're seeing. And so even Sonic asks is kind of an incredulous way, is the way it reads to me. I didn't really define it beyond that, because I didn't think it was necessary during a back and forth. But he even asks about it, and I have Tails unsure of the answer. But Tails is able to doubly invest into the idea of going after Eggman now, because Eggman's got better put together tech than he does. But he's also concerned about the amount of life energy that's clinging around the Sonic and that it could be dangerous. And I just want to point out that it's, I'm pointing out that it's weird that it's there. And there are reasons for it. Hopefully I don't forget about them, because again, I make this stuff up as I go, so I don't have all these detailed complex notes, and it's just a bit easier for me on a whole to just write it, because for some reason the way my mind works, if I know the story, I can't tell the story. If I have an idea of what the story could be, I can tell it. And it's just weird that way. Now, Sonic being relatively casual about danger, I have them both be dismissive of it, but also embracing of the danger. And that's again what I was talking about earlier with the idea of Sonic being a daredevil, enjoying the thrill that comes from the challenge, even when he has to start considering how bad things are getting. And of course, I take the time to let Tails mention this aspect of Sonic. And part of the reason I do it is just because for my long-term writing, well, I've done a ton of study of Sonic's character, ton of study of Amy's character, need to do a lot more study of other characters. Tails as a support character, he serves to help me redefine who Sonic is in the world in my AU, and how he will be in the story. And so, I'm very heavily at this point defining how I'll be writing Sonic going forward. Just because I know Sonic's character to a degree, and see his character a certain way, doesn't mean I don't have to introduce it both for both of the readers to know how my take on Sonic is, but also so I create a familiarity in myself when writing him, which takes what I know and turns it into the character in my story. How accurate it ends up in the end will always be debatable, but it does keep me able to write consistently, which I think is important. And now at this point, to make it easier for other readers to follow, I now switched to the more common term to describe the energy given off by the Chaos Emeralds, which is Chaos Energy. Which is reasonable to define it differently than just regular life energy, because if it's a manifestation, it's still different from the life of the planet. It's a interesting way to view it. And so, this is just one last thing of Sonic forward. Instead of calling it something he doesn't know, he's going to call it what he knows. And one last mention of the dream, but this time, Sonic smirks. He's let it go, and that's what this final paragraph is meant to do, is to release Sonic from his entire game history. So that way, the story of the AU can take place, and he's able to focus on it and what's important in it. And that's why I take the time to mention that it's not like him to look back. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the one time you'll see the location mentioned here, the Park Islands, which is literally just a place I made up for the beach Sonic and Tails are hanging out on, because Tails is supposed to be on a different island according to the Sonic 3 instruction manual than the beach Sonic is hanging out on. And so at this point, Sonic is now acknowledging that things are different from the memories that he has, because he doesn't have to cast Emeralds at this point. That is already a huge difference. And even though there's literally no stream for it, if you are familiar with, well, if you're watching the stream with the future, you'll know it. But the scene that I wrote in, which is now the first scene of New History, it ends with saying Sonic made a new future. And so again, we're kind of repeating that idea here, that he's aware of a different path now. And I take a bit of time here with this final line of his excitement for a new adventure, but also the worry of Amy eating at the back of his mind like a shadow, is I'm still kind of bringing the attention to the bad shape Amy was left in. I don't have the image up right now for easy showing it off, but again, you'll see this idea of this remnant that Amy's reduced to at the beginning of the story. She'll get better. Not necessarily back to being the Amy that most people know, because again, the idea will be exploring Amy's character in a different way. No hammer, no hammer-enabled temper, but instead pushing her further into pursuit that Tails once had, and that she once had, of Sonic. But that's for significantly later in the story. And so as we get away from there, and we get to the final paragraph, not only do we end this scene and put in a location switch, which we'll be getting to with tomorrow's stream, and now take the time to have a takeoff of the tornado. and I'll be describing that more next scene. But here is just literally putting the scene behind now and showing that we're going towards what's next. And I purposely set this scene up to be less abstract for this final paragraph, so that way my opening descriptors for the scene to come will have less reason to be as heavily philosophical, and so it's kind of just a transition point to make it more natural for that point. And with that, we've reached the very end of the scene, and that means I can go ahead and run my checks, which is usually just the editor. Gives me this little X down here, and is not happy with my spelling and 3 cases of grammar, such as my horrible misspelling of scientific. Go ahead and drop the comma there, drop the comma there, and this one we can ignore because that's for different reasons why it's there like that. And with that, the scene's done. And since I don't see any questions in the chat right now, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap things up then. And to that end, that means I'll be advertising the next stream, which will be tomorrow, once again at 9 AM Greenwich Mean Time. And again, we'd just like to thank everyone for joining the stream. I appreciate having everybody stop by. But it's time to wrap up. So thank you again so much for stopping by. I hope everybody will join me again tomorrow. Until then, have yourselves a great Sunday and stay well.